February 7th, 1964. An airplane touches down in New York and an already roaring crowd erupts into chaos. 4 young Brits descend onto the tarmac, greeted by a wave of screams. This wasn't just a pop group's arrival, it was the dawn of something the world had never seen. Beatlemania. It's the winter of 1964 and a musical fever is gripping the world. In the 1960s, the Beatles didn't just top music charts, they tapped into the psychology of a generation. Why did millions of otherwise ordinary people flip into hysterics at the mere sight of these musicians? In this documentary, we'll journey through the psychological and subconscious effects of the Beatles' music, from the frenzy of their early years to the mind-bending studio experiments of the late 60s. We'll explore how their melodies, rhythms, and even the frequencies they played could subtly influence brains and behavior. Our story starts with that explosion of Beatlemania, a cultural phenomenon that blurred the line between fanaticism and mass joy, leaving experts scrambling to make sense of it. Psychologists and sociologists at the time struggled to understand this phenomenon. Was it mere youthful enthusiasm or a form of mass hysteria? A 1964 Wellington study in New Zealand set out to measure the psyche of these frenzied fans. Surprisingly, researchers found no signs of psychopathology in devoted admirers. In other words, the fans were not crazy, just caught up in a transient wave of emotional excitement. Younger female fans did show signs of adolescent immaturity, as one might expect in teenagers. But the thrill was largely a group-induced euphoria fueled by the novelty of the moment. Many admitted that mass media hype, anticipation, and the electric beat of the live shows had primed them to a fever pitch. It was a perfect storm of cultural and psychological factors. A post-war baby boom generation with disposable income and a yearning for newness, the rise of television spreading images of joyous crowds, and 4 charismatic performers whose music exuded an upbeat, optimistic energy. Indeed, empirical analysis of the Beatles' music shows it was, on average, more energetic and positively emotive than many of its contemporaries. Their early songs were generally fast-paced, major-key tunes about love and hope, a recipe that engages listeners' reward centers and invites mass sing-alongs. Music psychologists Adrian North and Amanda Krauss, 2024, found the Beatles' recordings to be louder, faster and more upbeat, positively balanced, than almost any of the 170,000 songs in their dataset. This high-energy optimism likely amplified the emotional impact on fans. Hearing "She Loves You" or "I Want to Hold Your Hand" blaring from radios gave listeners an instant dopamine boost, setting off excitement that spread like wildfire. By the time the band landed at JFK Airport in February 1964 to throngs of ecstatic fans, it was clear that pop music and psychology had intertwined in a powerful new way. What was it about this music that could trigger such euphoria? To find out, we must look inside the human mind and brain. Why do our brains crave music? Picture a network of neurons lighting up like a city at night. The moment a Beatles song begins, our auditory system springs to life, decoding each note and harmony. Almost instantly, the limbic system, the brain's emotional core, starts firing, and dopamine, the feel-good neurotransmitter, is released. Your heart might beat a little quicker, you sway or tap your foot without thinking. That's your motor cortex responding to the rhythm. Remarkably, music can even synchronize the brain's oscillating waves. The human brain responds to music in profound ways, orchestrating a whole symphony of neural and hormonal changes. When we listen to a beloved song, multiple brain regions light up. The auditory cortex decodes the sound, the limbic system generates emotion, and the motor cortex might even make us tap our feet. Neuroscientists have discovered that enjoyable music triggers the release of dopamine, the brain's pleasure chemical, similar to the response from delicious food or even addictive substances. This dopamine rush can create feelings of euphoria and chills, that tingling wave some people feel in peak musical moments. In one famous 2011 study, researchers using PET scans observed dopamine release in listeners during the most emotional peaks of music. It's no wonder that hearing a song like She Loves You in 1964 could send fans into fits of joy. Their brains were literally rewarding them for the experience. Beyond chemicals, music alters our brain's electrical rhythms. Brainwave patterns like alpha waves associated with relaxed reflective states or beta waves, alert focus states, can be influenced by musical tempo, tone, and repetition. For example, a gentle lullaby or a slow mantra-like melody might encourage a shift into calming alpha waves, while a fast, pulsating rock rhythm can bump us into an excited beta state. In fact, back in 1962, Dr. Ernest G. Salk demonstrated that playing a slow, rhythmic heartbeat sound could soothe infants, reducing their agitation. Conversely, faster rhythms and louder beats tend to increase arousal, which can excite listeners. Close your eyes and listen to a steady beat. Your brain waves may begin to mirror it. Slow the beat, and the brain slips towards a relaxed alpha state. Speed it up, and you ride a beta wave of excitement. The Beatles and their production team intuitively leveraged these effects. Their music ranges from the high-energy pulse of songs like Twist and Shout, sure to get hearts racing and feet stomping, to the dreamy calm of later tracks like Because, which can almost lull the mind into a trance. As we'll see in upcoming song analyses, the Beatles often played with tempo and rhythm to guide the listener's emotional journey, speeding up to intensify excitement or slowing down to invite introspection. The Beatles' genius wasn't only in their lyrics or melodies, but in how those sounds could tune the human mind, bringing calm, joy, or wild excitement. Armed with this understanding of music's effects on mind and body, we can now appreciate how the Beatles began to push the boundaries. Using the studio as their laboratory, they crafted songs that intentionally or accidentally harnessed these psychological principles. Having set the stage, we now explore several pivotal Beatles songs from 1962 to 1970 to see how the band's musical experimentation tapped into psychological and subconscious effects. Each of these tracks pushed the envelope of what pop music could sound like, employing innovative techniques to provoke specific mental and emotional responses in the listener. We'll examine the songwriting, production tricks, and even the use of exotic instruments and audio effects that influenced how these songs feel, not just on a surface musical level, but deep in our psyche. When Tomorrow Never Knows burst forth as the final track on Revolver in 1966, it signaled a radical shift in popular music. A single chord drone, a barrage of tape loop effects, and lyrics straight from a psychedelic manual. The song was primarily written by John Lennon, who was inspired by Timothy Leary's The Psychedelic Experience, itself a guide adapted from the ancient Tibetan Book of the Dead. In Lennon's own words, this was my Tibetan Book of the Dead period, openly an LSD-inspired song. Indeed, Tomorrow Never Knows was arguably designed to simulate an LSD trip in audio form. It has a continuous drone in C underlying the entire track. Instead of the usual chord changes, the harmony stays largely static, anchoring the listener in a kind of musical ohm. This drone, supplied by a tambura, an Indian instrument, and bass, coupled with Ringo's relentless trance-like drum pattern, creates a feeling of timelessness. Producer George Martin and engineer Geoff Emerick helped the Beatles layer an array of bizarre sounds, tape loops of seagull-like cries, distorted sitar scales, backwards guitar riffs, and swirling Leslie speaker effects on the vocals. Lennon famously asked to sound like he was chanting from a mountaintop, resulting in his voice being run through a rotating Leslie speaker cabinet, which gives that woozy, disembodied texture. The cumulative effect on the listener's subconscious is striking. The steady one-chord harmony, with only a subtle implied shift when a B-flat chord intermittently appears against the C drone, can induce a meditative state, much like a sustained Buddhist chant might do. Repetition in the drum and bass groove encourages the brain to settle into the song's rhythmic frequency, potentially synchronizing the listener's heartbeat or brainwave tempo to that steady 120 beats per minute pulse. Meanwhile, the unpredictable kaleidoscope of looped sound effects keeps the conscious mind off balance, mimicking the sensory overload of a psychedelic experience. From a psychological perspective, Tomorrow Never Knows engages the orienting response, our innate reaction to novel stimuli. Each new bizarre sound, like a sped-up tape of an orchestra or a backwards laugh, momentarily grabs attention while the constant drone pulls the mind back into a hypnotic focus. The lyrics themselves read like instructions to relax and float downstream, reinforcing the idea of surrendering one's mental control. It's essentially a guided meditation in rock form. Notably, there's evidence that droning music and repetitive rhythms can stimulate alpha wave activity in the brain, which is linked to meditative calm. While listening to Tomorrow Never Knows, one might experience a mild, altered state, a feeling of detachment or deep immersion, without any substances at all. The Beatles had effectively crafted a 3-minute, radio-friendly mind trip. Fast forward to 1967, Beatles fans drop the needle on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and encounter something entirely unexpected at track 8, Within You, Without You. This song, written and performed by George Harrison with a group of Indian classical musicians, immerses the listener in a sonic approximation of an Eastern meditation session. Gone are the drums, guitars, and catchy refrains. Instead, we hear the sinuous melodies of the sitar and dilruba, the gentle drone of tamburas and tabla rhythms rolling like distant thunder. Musically, Within You, Without You is structured like a piece of Indian classical music. It's largely in one scale, or raga, with a constant drone underpinning Harrison's vocals. This drone, believed to be C-sa in the recording, serves a similar purpose as in Tomorrow Never Knows. It centers the mind. Listeners find themselves almost subconsciously regulating their breathing to the slow, serene pace of the music. The absence of Western-style chord changes or a toe-tapping backbeat causes a shift in how one listens. Instead of anticipating the next chord or chorus, you relax into the sound, letting it wash over you. Psychologically, Within You. Without You invites introspection. The lyrics deliver a philosophical message about the illusory nature of ego and the unity of all things. When you're listening, you may learn something new within you and without you. These themes, coupled with the music's spiritual aura, can nudge a listener into a contemplative frame of mind. Many Western listeners in 1967 reported feeling a strange calm or even a sense of spaciness while listening to this track, a stark contrast to the excitement of typical pop. Part of this effect comes from the song's use of slow tempos and long stretches of drawn-out notes, which can encourage the brain to drift into theta wave patterns associated with daydreaming or deep meditation. In a way, this track was a form of early cultural music therapy. It introduced an entire generation to the meditative mood of Indian devotional music. Harrison's sincere delivery and the song's lack of a clear hook or resolution leave the listener in a slightly transcendent state by the end. You have to mentally lean in to appreciate it. And that act of focused listening is itself meditative. One notable audio feature is the song's use of Indian instrumentation and tuning. Indian classical music doesn't follow the Western equal temperament 440 Hz scale in a strict way. Instead, instruments are tuned relative to the drone, say, and can involve microtones. This exotic tuning and the presence of instruments like the sitar, which has sympathetic vibrating strings, create rich overtone frequencies that can stimulate the brain in unique ways. The listener, perhaps not consciously, is exposed to a different tone scale and timbre that can spark novel neural responses, since the brain is encountering unfamiliar sound patterns. Some listeners describe an almost floaty or out-of-body feeling during the instrumental sections, as if the music's rising and falling microtonal slides on the Dilruba lift their mind upward. It's interesting to note that scientific studies have found music can indeed induce trance states. Repetitive droning sounds are a common element in many cultures' meditation music for this reason. Culturally, the impact of Within You, Without You was profound. It acted as a bridge between Western youth and Eastern philosophy, arguably contributing to the West's surge of interest in yoga, meditation, and consciousness expansion during the Summer of Love. From a subconscious standpoint, it planted seeds of calm and reflection in an album that is otherwise full of bright, extroverted moments. Sequenced in the middle of Sgt. Pepper, it effectively gives the listener a mindful pause. George Harrison later said that if even a handful of people were moved to explore Indian music or think about the song's message of unity, then it was a success. Many did, experiencing firsthand how music can quiet the mind's chatter and open one to deeper thoughts. If Within You, Without You took listeners to an Eastern ashram in their minds, Strawberry Fields Forever, recorded late 1966, released 1967, took them on a journey into the dreamy landscape of memory and the subconscious. Written by John Lennon about his childhood place of play, the garden of a Salvation Army home called Strawberry Field, the song is imbued with a feeling of nostalgic introspection. But it's the sound of the track that really plays tricks on the mind. Producer George Martin and engineer Jeff Emmerich famously spliced together two different versions of Strawberry Fields, each in a different key and tempo by slightly altering tape speeds to make them match. The result is that the final track exists in a subtly warped tonal universe. It's not fully in any standard key, and the instrumentation has a dreamlike timbre, partly because one take was slowed down, giving vocals a lower, hazier quality, and the other take was sped up. Without knowing these technical details, a listener might simply feel that something is a bit off, a bit magical about the sound. This is a classic subconscious effect. The slight detuning and the mellotron flute intro, their new electromechanical sampler instrument, immediately signal that we're entering a fantasy realm. The brain, attuned to typical musical tuning, subconsciously notes the odd pitch blend and responds with a sense of intrigue, much like how our mind reacts to a dream where things are familiar yet somehow strange. Strawberry Fields Forever also employs backwards audio and other psychedelic effects sparingly in the coda. In the final seconds, one can hear Lennon's voice saying what many interpret as cranberry sauce, though famously misheard as I Buried Paul, and a swirl of murky sound that just fades away without resolution. This ending leaves the subconscious with a lingering sense of mystery. Throughout the song, the lyrics blur reality and imagination. Nothing is real and nothing to get hung about, which combined with the woozy orchestration, cellos, strange percussion can induce a mild dissociative feeling in the listener, as if you're floating inside John's half-remembered childhood dream. The verses and chorus also never quite give a clear emotional resolution. The melody wanders in a somewhat melancholic minor mode, but with shifts that feel uplifting at times. This ambiguity, happy or sad, major or minor, keeps the emotional part of the brain engaged, even unsettled. In terms of subconscious influence, nostalgia itself is a powerful psychological state that the song triggers. Even if the listener didn't share John's childhood, the tone of wistfulness in the melody and the gentle yearning in his voice can evoke one's own memories. Some fans have reported that Strawberry Fields Forever makes them feel like they're peering through the fog of memory, stirring up personal emotions not directly related to the song. This is partly because the music's dreamlike quality encourages a mild theta brainwave state, where one is prone to inward reflection, similar to the state between wakefulness and sleep, when daydreams occur. From a production standpoint, this track was one of the first where the Beatles used the studio as an instrument to this degree. They layered uncommon instruments like the Swarman Dull and Indian harp, adding sparkly arpeggios, and used varispeed recording, altering tape speed, which directly manipulates frequencies. Varispeed can change timbre in ways the ear isn't used to, a kind of subconscious novelty. For instance, Ringo's drum parts and the percussion were recorded slower and then sped up, giving them a slightly snappier, otherworldly sound. Your brain hears a drum, but its tone and decay are off in a way that says this is not ordinary. The net psychological effect of Strawberry Fields Forever is gentle disorientation. It invites you into a reflective, almost hypnotic state, living is easy with eyes closed as Lennon sings, then subtly warps the musical reality around you. By the end of the song, especially with that fade-out trickery, you're left momentarily questioning what you heard, much like waking from a vivid dream and pondering its meaning. In pop music of the time, nothing quite had this layered psychological depth. It was artful how the Beatles made a personal memory into a universal shared dream.